So if you're just joining us, thank you for being here tonight. This is our second Landmark Learns in a series about social emotional learning. We're incredibly excited to have Hillary McKay Smith and Delaney West here with us. We're excited to see what the next hour will hold, talking about specifically self-awareness and self-management for struggling learners. Perhaps you were here for our initial overview. There will be some review of that if you were not, so that you're able to jump in and really take away as much as you can from the content tonight. All right, Delaney, you can head to our next slide. So again, Landmark Learns is a series. This year we're focused on social emotional learning. You can still access the recording from January 28th with Christine Vanderwerf. After this session, we have another focus on managing relationships, skills, and social awareness for social emotional learning coming up on March 25th. And the final webinar of this series will be on April 14th, focusing on responsible decision making, the final pillar of SEL that we'll be discussing through the Landmark Learn series. Logistics tonight, we'll send a recording with the resources to anyone who registered for the webinar tomorrow sometime. Please use the Q&A to submit any questions. Hillary and Delaney will be taking questions along the way during this webinar, so we'll be able to answer them throughout the session and also at the end. If you would like to access closed captioning, you can turn on the closed captioning button by clicking CC or live transcript and choosing the show subtitle. If you're new to Landmark School, just a little bit about us. We are a school for students in grades 2 through 12. We have an elementary middle school campus that's 2 through 8 and a high school campus 9 through 12 that focuses on students with dyslexia and other language-based learning differences. Our high school also features a boarding program. The entire campus, both campuses, feature small classes and individualized tutorial, robust activities, and also a summer program at both campuses as well. Landmark is lucky to feature not only a school, but also an outreach program. Landmark Learns is a piece of Landmark School adjacent to outreach. But if you have more interest in the ways that we train our teachers and folks out in the community, including districts, you can visit our website and learn more about the outreach program as well as the school. All right, this is me. If you came to our first webinar, you've seen me before. I'm the host for this series. My name is Laura Polvinen. I'm the Director of Counseling and Community Engagement at Landmark. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm excited to be here tonight to hear what Hillary and Delaney have to share with us about self-management and self-awareness.
Awesome. My name is Delaney West, and my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am one of the counselors at Landmark's Elementary Middle School.
And I'm Hillary McKay Smith. I'm also she, her, hers. And I'm the assistant director of the prep program at Landmark High School. And I'm also a faculty member. I teach 4 classes this year.
So our objectives tonight with Hillary and Delaney, you'll really get an understanding of how we represent SEL across our program from grades 2 through 12. They also bring their own personal experiences in terms of their life outside of Landmark to bear on this topic. So our goal is to help you understand self-awareness and self-management specifically in the SEL framework, to know the difference between discomfort and dysregulation. This is a huge topic for us at Landmark, and I think culturally right now of how to help our students bolster their tolerance of discomfort. And finally, to take away some strategies that either you might use in the classroom if you're coming to us as an educator or at home with your family.
Awesome. So an agenda is a frequently used tool here at Landmark. So what better way to kick off the webinar? So we've done our introductions. In a moment, Laura is going to talk a little bit about SEL or social emotional learning, the framework overview that we'll be referencing throughout the whole series. We're going to talk a bit more specifically about self-awareness and then self-management. We'll also talk about executive function, visit some of those strategies for both home and the classroom, and then end off with a wrap up and some questions. So to start off, we're going to ask that you all identify for yourselves what sheep you are feeling like in this very moment. So I'll give everybody a couple moments to do that.
Feels like a difficult decision at 7 p.m. after one day of school on a Wednesday.
You can have more than one, I'll tell you that.
So many possible sheep I could be.
So if you have selected your sheep for this moment right now, we do this to kind of showcase one of the activities that we incorporate into many of our SEL lessons. It's good for all ages. It can be quick, right? Pick a sheep and move on. It's also not just sheep. We change the images around. It can be long too, or longer, right? Saying of like, pick a sheep and explain why. And the purpose of this really is to promote self-awareness, right? So just getting students to practice checking in with what they're feeling in this very moment. It could be in terms of energy level or what emotions they're happening, but really just to promote self-awareness. And it's a nice, quick and easy and fun for all ages activity to do that for.
Delaney, I like the way this tool externalizes what kids might be feeling. So it's not that, especially I imagine Hillary for high schoolers, this like, how are you feeling?
Yeah.
Tell us your deep feelings, but instead, like, just take a moment to even identify your energy level. Are you a 5? Are you feeling kind of silly in a 1? And you don't have to utilize other words, which is so important for our student group. So I'm excited to dig more into that self-awareness piece.
Exactly. It's a nice low stakes way to check in with yourself.
So before I let Hillary take it away, we discussed the 5 pillars of SEL in our first webinar. And so just to go over that, we use the Castle model, which I know Hillary will go into a little bit more in a moment. But self-awareness and self-management will be the focus of this webinar. In the future, we'll focus on social awareness and relationship skills, and finally, responsible decision making. But we really find that these 5 pieces, as you can see in the model, are intertwined in terms of how students experience social emotional learning, and also for us as adults. You can see from some of the other words that this involves classrooms, schools, families, and caregivers are such a crucial part in social emotional learning. And we'll hopefully demonstrate for you tonight that there are all different ways you participate without trying and with trying in the social emotional learning and growth of the students that are in your care.
Yes, I really love this diagram. I think it's really helpful. It's simple, but also just like captures so much. So social and emotional learning, or SEL, as we'll refer to it, often have already referred to it, is a strength-based process that helps people develop skills to support healthy relationships and development. As Laura just said, we use the CASTLE framework, and at the center of this diagram are the 5 core social and emotional competencies that support learning and development. So self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision making. And as we said, we're going to talk primarily about self-awareness and self-management tonight. Surrounding the core competencies are the 4 primary settings where students live and grow. So communities, families, and caregivers, schools, and classrooms. So the partnership between the 4 settings informs SEL practices and helps us establish equitable learning environments across all of these contexts. So we're going to touch on multiple of these contexts tonight, but primarily classroom, schools, families, and caregivers.
So if we start off by looking at self-awareness, that we're defining this as an individual's ability to understand his, her, or their own thoughts, emotions, beliefs, actions, and values, and how they influence behavior. And this includes the capacity to recognize one's strengths and limitations with a well-grounded sense of confidence and purpose. So it's that first of the SEL competencies, self-awareness is, and that's because it's such a foundational skill. A big piece of self-awareness is learning about emotions. And one really can't have metacognition, which is that thinking about one's own thinking, if one doesn't have the self-awareness to kind of create a foundation.
Self-awareness really must be a lifelong process. That's a
It
toll.
is.
So along with self-awareness is self-management or regulation. So the ability to manage one's emotions, thoughts, and behaviors effectively in different situations and to achieve goals. Talk about a lifelong process for all of us. So this is about managing stress, maybe delaying gratification to find or feel motivation or agency to accomplish goals. So the self-management piece also really connects to executive function, as does self-awareness. We're going to talk about that more tonight, how there's really an interplay between all of these skills. And that's really important for a lot of our students at Landmark.
So I imagine as we talk about kind of self-awareness and self-management, we're going to be focusing specifically on LBLD learners and kind of the way they experience these two, and just knowing that it has to be harder to regulate oneself and manage oneself in an environment where academics are more challenging. Like I imagine you both see that quite a bit. And so I think a lot of the tools I'm sure you'll discuss will apply to learners in general, but specifically to our students in ways to kind of break it down to make it more deliverable for them.
Yeah, definitely.
Exactly. And it's good to talk about kind of the experiences of learners with LBLD or language-based learning differences. And we put this image up here to kind of help explain that a little bit. So LBLD is referring to a spectrum of difficulties related to the understanding and use of both spoken and written language. LBLD is a common cause of students' academic struggles because weaker language skills can impede with comprehension and communication, which are the basis for most school activities. So this image here shows the language box, and the language box includes internal language at its center, as the ability to communicate with oneself through self-talk is critical for managing the demands of language. So if we go through it just quickly, we have listening, right? And that's the way we process or receive oral language. So right now you're listening to me give you oral information. You might hear that someone has an oral processing disorder, which means listening is harder for them. Then if we go to speaking, speaking is the way we orally produce language. So if someone with an LBLD has a challenge with speaking or expressing themselves with words, that's an expressive language disorder. Next, we go to reading. Reading is the way that we process written information. So students may have an LBLD where their main challenge is processing written language or reading, and dyslexia is a reading disorder. The act of reading could be a challenge itself, or understanding what one is reading, comprehension, can be difficult. Lastly, we have writing, and writing is the act of expressing yourself through written word. So when students have a challenge with writing, they're having trouble with written expression, and this can be referred to as a disorder of written expression. Sometimes the physical action of writing words is challenging, and other times coming up with content to write and organizing is difficult. Um, and when one or more of these language areas is posing difficulty for students, it's likely that they don't have a full understanding of the underlying structure of language. So we go through this just to give a bit of an overview to kind of help visualize some struggles that learners with LBLDs deal with.
I've looked at this box many a time, and I don't think it occurred to me until just now the connection, I know you'll talk about this later, between internal language and self-awareness, how hard it is for some of our students to generate self-talk. And therefore, if you're not sure what your brain is saying to yourself, it's going to be really hard to be aware of what you're thinking and feeling.
Right. It's such a pivotal part to these skills.
Yeah, I think what Delaney just explained about the language box really, I think, highlights why students with LBLDs might stand to get especially frustrated in a school setting, because traditionally schools are going to rely so much on reading, writing, speaking, and listening as kind of the foundation of their learning. And so we thought it would be important to go over real quickly the 6 teaching principles that are kind of the foundation of all Landmark teaching across the elementary, middle, and high schools. And the first one is providing opportunities for our students to experience success. So if our students have historically really struggled in an academic setting, it's really important for them to have the chance to experience success. So that's something that we try to always include in a lesson. We also want to engage students through multisensory approaches so that it's not always reading, not always writing. We can vary it. We can offer them ways to move their body or engage with content in a tactile way. We want to help break things down for students and structure tasks, because we'll talk about this a bit more later, but when something feels like an enormous task and you're really struggling to figure out how to tackle it, that can be super frustrating. So we're going to break things down and make things highly structured. And eventually work to pull that maybe away a little bit and ask our students to do that for themselves, which we can do through ensuring automatization through practice and review. So we're going to keep spiraling back. We're going to give them multiple touch points on content and skills. We're going to provide models for our students to use as guides. So sort of like how Delaney put the sheep up. That was a model of a way to check in with yourself. And we always want to include our students in the learning process, and that can look like a lot of different things. It can look like gauging student interest for a project, um, calling on students. It can look like asking students to participate in an activity. So there's lots of different ways that all of these principles could look in a classroom. But this is kind of like the bedrock of all of our teaching at Landmark.
All right, so pivoting from our teaching principles a little bit, we're going to talk about emotional vocabulary and a few other concepts that are pretty central to some of these SEL skills of self-awareness and management. So, emotional vocabulary is referring to the range of words used to identify, label, and communicate one's feelings. It involves moving beyond just the basic labels of mad and sad to more precise and nuanced terms like frustrated, devastated in order to improve self-awareness, emotional regulation, and empathy. So students may demonstrate a difficulty in identifying emotions and therefore communicating emotions. And this can be challenging because in order to regulate or in order to have awareness, we have to first be able to identify, right, what we're experiencing and feeling, kind of building in how self-awareness is the groundwork for self-regulation and emotional vocabulary is kind of at the crux of that.
So, what can you do with this issue of emotional vocabulary? So, one strategy that you can see on the screen right now is to provide your students or your child with a visual like this one that helps students identify a specific feeling. I see these a lot, like in a preschool, something like this with the faces on the side. Um, and I like this one because it gives a few words for each feeling category. So it could help students who may be struggling to retrieve that vocabulary. It might help them develop that feeling vocabulary to use next time. And certainly they can rely on kind of the pictures. It also, as caregivers and teachers, gives us some signs that we might see. If a student is feeling angry, furious, explosive, maybe they are stomping. Okay, so that's a behavior that we might see. And then on the right-hand side, it says, what can you do about it? Offer some strategies in the moment to try to kind of harness that feeling, help a student identify it, and maybe channel it into something more productive. So as a caregiver, you could kind of even like focus just on that column and use that for yourself and use the left side as something for the child to help identify their feeling.
Hillary, I love that you could also use this. It seems like with an older audience, if you were to say like, how would you teach younger kids about this, or what would you say to,
Mhm.
kind of put them in the driver's seat in that way? I'm
Yeah.
wondering like what sorts of feelings do you see maybe with your high school students? I'm sure for Delaney too, in terms of middle schoolers, and like how do they describe what they're feeling, or what are the limitations on some of that feeling vocabulary?
Yeah, I think what often comes up for my high school students is feelings related to avoidance, maybe worry and anxiety. And that can look really different in different students. Some students, I had a student recently say, I'm dysregulated right now. And I know we'll talk a little bit more later about that word dysregulated because I think it's trending on TikTok or something. I don't know. Kids are talking about it. Um, and so it might look like shutdown. It might look like silly behavior, kind of class clown behavior. It might look like what I sometimes call productive avoidance, which is like a lot of organizing all at once. Sorry. Or sort of finding another task to busy oneself with.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
I think there's commonalities between the two age groups too, right? Like Hillary's speaking to what she's seeing with high school students, and at the elementary and the middle school, there's commonalities, also differences. I think we see that in the elementary and middle school level, lots of times students will come into the counseling space with feelings of frustration, right? And or anxiety and worry. And oftentimes, like Hillary said, avoidance can kind of be at the center of that too. So sometimes when we're talking about frustration, it might be a social struggle. Or if it's worry, it could be, for example, an academic related, right? And it could be a student coming in with, previous academic challenges, right, that are kind of coming back up for them. perfectionistic tendencies can come up, or like, refusing to do an assignment, not because they're unwilling, but because that perfectionistic tendency and that avoidance is kind of ramping up and kicking in. And I love this right-hand side of the thermometers of what can you do about it. I think a lot of times with students, whether it's frustration or more worry, anxiety kind of feelings, is a change of setting and getting some physical input can be really helpful. I know that we have the flexibility in counseling sessions to go outside and move, right? Getting outside, getting some fresh air, moving your body, walking. Some of that physical input can be a great tool, and modeling that for students.
Mhm.
So it seems like from Delaney, when you describe some of our students with that in the language box with the expressive language, um, a kind of a teaching tool we use is a visual that even though it might seem elementary, for students with that expressive difficulty or when they're having a hard time expressing words might be more difficult, to see if they have a visual they want or even like a word box to choose from
Mhm.
that isn't just dysregulated or frustrated or mad, but kind of like more nuanced. Because I feel like
Mhm.
even for us as adults, sometimes you have like a feeling you're frustrated, but if you look beneath that, you're feeling ashamed or sad or left out or disappointed. And it takes a little while, I think, to get to those words. So I
Mhm.
love kind of this idea of a visual, but putting the student in the driver's seat of like what that should
Right.
look like, that would help them.
Yeah, like a personalized one. Mhm. So let's talk a little bit about frustration tolerance. That comes up a lot with this topic. So frustration tolerance is the ability to withstand, manage, and cope with challenging, stressful, or disappointing situations without becoming excessively upset, angry, or giving up. So, a low threshold can result in feeling overwhelmed by minor inconveniences and often leads to immediate abandonment of tasks or emotional outbursts or avoidance behaviors. I know we've mentioned that a few times now, this sense of avoidance. Low frustration tolerance can lead to those things. And students with LBLD can experience cognitive overload. And this is because decoding language, whether that's written or auditorily, requires such significant mental energy, and cognitive overload can then lead to a lower bandwidth for stress and lower frustration tolerance, and therefore frustration management.
I think, Delaney, you mentioned a moment ago, like those perfectionistic tendencies, and I definitely see with my students, for some of them who do have those tendencies, that bumping into that frustration tolerance, and any mistake is just, unacceptable and can lead to abandonment of the task or having a difficult time re-engaging with a task or an activity. And I think as Laura just mentioned, I think that can really get tied up with shame around, having made a mistake. So it's interesting to see those students who are actually doing a great job and are such perfectionists that they're doing like wonderful work, and then sort of get derailed by that frustration of their high expectations for themselves.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah.
So one strategy we wanted to include about frustration tolerance, or to build frustration tolerance, is just called the pause breath, and it's something that can be super quick, like 5 seconds, or it could be done maybe in a 30 or 60-second breathing exercise. And it's really just sort of put your hand on your chest, breathe in through your nose, and breathe out slowly through your mouth. Um, it's a great technique to practice intentionally as tasks are switching in the classroom. So if we've done a warm up or an activity and now we're about to switch to the next item on the agenda, we can say, okay, everybody pause, put your hand on your chest, take a deep breath in and exhale. For the high school students, I think they would probably they start the year finding that this is like maybe a little silly. But I actually do it. I'm in a community chorus group, and our chorus instructor does it with all of us. Like when we're moving on to a new section, she does it with us, and it actually feels really great. So it's really great regardless of age. Um, and it's something, if we're building it in moments where students aren't frustrated yet, and in sort of these calm moments where we just need a swift transition from one activity to the other. Um, it can just help them practice those skills. And then if they get to a point where they are starting to experience frustration, then they have this kind of in their back pocket and they've, sort of practiced in their body and their mind to know that this is a calming tool. And they might be more likely to engage with it. And, probably not if you just say, why don't you just take a deep breath? But if you say, let's take a pause breath, and they've practiced that already, that can be a way to help maybe bring the temperature down.
I love this. I was thinking about it this morning, trying to transition my kids off of a television show, like into getting ready for the school. But how do you find, Hillary, it works, like not having a whole group? Because I feel like when we do it at EMS, we have 30 students doing it, and it's strange not to be doing it then. But I imagine one-on-one, or it's a little
Yeah.
different.
Yeah, I think with my own kids who are little, they're 4, 7, and 9. Often what I'll do for them is to uh, pause and take a breath myself and talk it through and just say like, starting to feel a little frustrated. I can feel, I feel the tightness in my body. I'm going to put my hand on my chest and take my deep breath through my nose and out through my mouth. And because again, if I tell them in a moment of frustration or when it's time to turn off Bluey, if I say, take a deep breath, that doesn't go over well. So if I do it myself, then I have found there's a kind of higher likelihood. And I could definitely see that working in a one-on-one setting with a student also. Let's say if it's a tutorial student, I could definitely see myself using a similar strategy of sort of modeling what I'm doing with my breath as a calming strategy. Yeah. So that's my go-to. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine it even in like the car with a teen as a parent. Like sometimes I know we're going to talk a little bit about your own self-regulation, but that like, all right, I'm just going to take a moment here before I respond. And I feel like just as much as a feeling can be contagious, I feel like that regulative piece is also contagious. So that's great.
And if nothing else, it helps me calm down and not sort of meet the frustration of the moment that maybe the kids are experiencing. And so even if we end up in full meltdown mode, I'm sort of giving myself that moment to pause.
Mhm. Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about self-esteem. When we're talking about self-esteem, we're referring to someone's confidence in their own worth or abilities. And some students may present with lower self-esteem as related to previous academic challenges, social challenges. And something that can come up is experiences of masking that can come along with being neurodiverse. Our LBLD students often have experiences of masking and then can kind of feel that self-esteem take a hit when they're kind of unmasking for the first time in a while. And challenges with self-esteem can present in a lot of the ways that we also talked about with frustration tolerance too, right? Is that perfectionism or avoidance? Hillary, I know you mentioned like class clown behavior, right? Or maybe like shutting down. Shutting down when provided with feedback can be a big one, especially with lower feelings of self-esteem. We can also see like less academic risk-taking, or self-deprecating humor, right? Which isn't always a bad thing, but often can kind of be a sign of that too. So some looks of what to look for with self-esteem as that can be a challenge with students in this area.
Such a good point too, because self-esteem can be so hard to talk about with your kids, like your own kids, to have a discussion because you don't want to put them in a more vulnerable place. But I
Yeah.
feel like bringing that self-awareness piece to how we think about ourselves is so vital to how we manage, because if you're having a hard time and you're judging yourself for having a hard time, you need a lot more tools in your tool bag to manage than you do if you're just having a hard time.
It becomes significantly harder to apply those regulation strategies if there's also judgment on top of that. So that insight really does help.
Yeah, this like really connects to that first teaching principle again of providing students opportunities for success. When students are coming to the table with low self-esteem, part of what we can do is just try to show them wins kind of wherever we can. And there's a strategy I've always heard described as respond to the response. So this is a way that I think is great to help build self-confidence in students. and it's where, let's imagine a teacher asks a question and a student responds with something that is, some would say it's wrong. So one version of a response is to say, nope, somebody else, right? Which is not going to bolster any student's self-confidence. Another way of responding, this respond to the response, is to find what was right in the student's answer or sort of think about how they arrived at that answer. Um, and with practice, I just find this like one of the most powerful classroom tools ever. So some example like sentence frames. Oh, I see what you're thinking there. What else can we say about blank? Good, you noticed blank. Let's also look at blank. I like how you're thinking about blank. What about blank? So acknowledging what they did that was right. Maybe they used a resource. Maybe they thought back to a previous lesson. Um, Maybe they gave a really creative answer that wasn't what you were looking for, but it was cool. Or just like, hey, I love that you tried something out. What about what if I asked you about this? I think it can take a little practice in a classroom setting, but whenever I see it happen, like in an observation, or if I get the chance to exercise that, I just think it can lead to great moments.
This seems like it could be such a critical tool to use as a parent, like that it takes a little extra effort, right? Instead of being like no or whatever
Yes.
first comes to mind. I can imagine
Yes.
for myself, but how valuable, especially as our students are developing that internal language to basically like be their self-talk. How do
Mhm.
you envision this working in like a home setting? I mean, I have some ideas, but I love this idea of yes and to getting them to acknowledge kind of the right part of what they're saying, and moving them ahead at the same time.
Yeah, I think like we can always try to think about like the intention behind a behavior or a statement. My kids right now are in a big I didn't mean to phase. Something goes wrong, maybe they spill a cup of milk or whatever it is. I didn't mean to. And it's like, well, yeah, I know. Of course you didn't mean to. Like that, what can we do now? How can we move on now that the milk is spilled? And when kids are sort of reacting with that immediate like, "Oh, I'm going to get in trouble. I feel ashamed. I'm worried." I think that's an opportunity for all of us to again just try to bring the temperature down and find what's going well. Hey, can kids love sometimes getting a job to do. Hey, can you go get us a paper towel? Get two. One wet, one dry. Uh, you know, make it a game to help fix the problem. So I think there's lots of creative ways if we can have that kind of yes and approach in mind.
I love that kind of re-saying back their intention to them idea because I feel like this works as the social stakes get higher too. Like, of course you didn't mean to hurt that person's feelings, but like, let's talk about what you did say or how you could have said it differently. Like, I feel like that validates the human side of, I think most of our students are not trying to hurt anyone on purpose, but being able to still give them the feedback without just letting them off the hook, I guess, but in a more delicate way.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love this too because it kind of highlights the small pivots that, like Laura and Hillary both said, do require effort, right? But allow, a student or a child to be able to not be in that like as vulnerable of a space with lower frustration tolerance or issues with self-esteem by us making these small adjustments that can help them with growth in these areas
Yeah,
without it feeling so, pinpointed.
right.
Another way that we can build self-confidence is to find areas where the child is successful. So we're highlighting again this teaching principle of providing opportunities for success. So when we're finding those areas where a child's successful, sometimes we're calling it zone of competence, and giving them frequent opportunities to shine. So think about how to find a balance of pushing kids or students with the skills that they're building while also giving them opportunities to succeed. So if a child is really good with art, right, this might look like giving them an artistic opportunity to show their knowledge. On the other hand, if a child is struggling with math or writing, we could start them off with practice questions or skills that we know they're already doing well, so that they're starting off strong with an activity. Um, and again, this highlights like that importance of why it's a teaching principle is that providing opportunities for success is just such a good kind of scaffold.
How do we do this at home? Because obviously the classroom is a unique setting here, but like
Mm.
how for parents could they capitalize on those opportunities
Yeah.
for success?
And I think likely, I mean, the parentless person talking about it, but I think likely families are already doing this, right, in ways without necessarily realizing. But one way is to kind of allow your child to be like in that role of expert, right? And this could be in an area that they have a strong interest in or an area of passion for them, right? Of like, yeah, like walk me through how you fine-tuned that slap shot, right? Or it also could be, addressing skills in the home or chores, things like that, of telling a child, all right, you're the head chef for the salad tonight, all right, and kind of giving them the role of expert, um, and allowing them to kind of show off their precision, their skill. Um, Something else to do at home is scaffolding tasks in a way, and this is something that I'm sure I imagine families are often doing already when it comes to like routines, right? Morning routine or bedtime routine. So just like breaking down the bits of the routine, so allowing your child to have these successes, right? Of instead of they missed one aspect of a routine and it feels like a failure of, oh my gosh, you did all these, this step, then this step, then this step is like building up those successes. So breaking down tasks into like a scaffolded approach can help with that. Um, and that ties into executive function, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Another something else that families and folks can do at home is visual reminders. So I'm thinking a little bit of that thermometer that Hillary showed us off earlier of just like the power of visuals. But you can have visual reminders of growth as well. So like I'm thinking is kind of this classic, maybe for a younger kiddo, like a sticker chart, right, of completing tasks or mastering certain skills. But something that both the child and the caregiver are involved in, and something that they can continually come back to and work on, and but can also see, right? So it's like this visual reminder of their successes and their growth.
What about a checklist for a grown-up who needs to write things down?
Love a good checklist.
I feel like I give myself opportunities for success when I write something on there I didn't think I would do, and then I do it and I cross it off anyway.
It feels good.
It does.
Okay, Delaney just mentioned executive function, and maybe some of you watching right now are sort of starting to see a through line about some of the skills that we're talking about with executive function. So, executive function can be defined as a set of complex mental processes and cognitive abilities that enable us to manage everyday tasks, including making plans, focusing attention, remembering instructions, juggling multiple tasks, solving problems, and adapting to new situations successfully. Is that all? It's
So
so
easy.
sounds super easy for a young kid who struggles with language. So this just presents a lot of ground for kids to a lot of opportunity for skill development, executive function for all of us. This is an ongoing process, I think, for all of us, regardless of age.
Always. So yeah, again, it's like the heftiness of yeah, executive functions. Like, is that it? But so if we look at the role of executive function in some of these SEL skills, right? If we look at self-awareness and self-management, also we can refer to it as self-regulation. We're looking at how much self-awareness and management underlie all these EF skills. Again, I think we mentioned this a little bit earlier in terms of the ability to regulate. It's like one needs to have that self-awareness to then be able to regulate, and one needs to also be able to regulate in order to engage in these various executive function skills. And we can see this here in this visual, highlighting, various components of EF, particularly noting how regulation of emotions, alertness, energy, right, is involved in effort and in tolerating frustrations and other emotions. So we can really see the underlying piece of how at play these SEL skills are in the ability to even approach or engage in any type of EF skill.
Tonight is such a perfect example. Like think about signing on to a webinar. The focus you have to have at 7:40 p.m. after a day of work. The
Mhm.
effort you all took to get here and like staying alert while listening to us talk, what you're feeling and thinking, hoping you're going to remember something in the days that come. And I think about that action step too. How often do I attend a webinar? I need to take notes and then like review, go back to them to make sure I'm making that action, even if it was the simple yes and. How am I going
Mhm.
to remember to do that in a few weeks? It takes a lot. It takes a lot of processes altogether.
Yeah, definitely. And sort of if distraction comes into play, if a loss of focus comes into play, that's where we see maybe some of these strands kind of start to come loose. So what you might see in, again, thinking about like those outer circles of the SEL diagram in these various settings that our kids are in class, the field, at home, what you might see when students are struggling with these SEL skills and executive function, we might see low motivation, a lot of kind of sitting on the couch, not shifting away from the kind of low-hanging fruit tasks. We might see learned helplessness, this idea that like, why even try because I'm not going to be able to do it anyway. You might see shutdown and maybe some obstinance about refusing to work. Task avoidance. This is like a headliner for me. Hiding, class clowning, um, distracting self or others, which kind of ties into some maybe immature behaviors. We might see total school phobia, school refusal, poor emotional self-regulation. So that might lead to what we might call meltdowns or temper tantrums, especially in younger kids. Oppositional or argumentative behavior in students, and maybe a lack of stamina. So maybe a student can initiate and engage in a task for 5 to 10 minutes and then is exhausted by it and isn't able to sort of regulate enough to continue that task.
I'm seeing just as you describe all these elements, how that EFSEL is like, it's hard to tell what's what,
Yeah.
right? Especially in a classroom or at home. Is your child having difficulty in showing low motivation for organizing their bag for hockey practice because of EF skills or because they're exhausted and having such trouble managing? I mean, it's probably both, right? But
Probably
kind
both, yeah.
of at the same time.
Yeah,
Which came first, chicken or egg? I don't know.
right. And it might not be worth it to try to tease out what really is at play. It might be
That
more worth
moment.
it to try to, figure out the next steps to moving to a more organized hockey bag. Because
True.
I agree with you. I think it's really hard to kind of pull these threads apart.
So just to reiterate this connection, right? Um, and again, not always able to tease them apart. We're just looking here at like, if okay, we have these SEL competencies of self-awareness, self-management, as involving the following skills. So we have emotional control, impulse control, organization, task initiation, attention and focus, planning and prioritizing, self-monitoring, working memory, flexible thinking. So all those skills, those are EF skills. So again, just to highlight that interconnected nature of the two, um, is so crucial.
Why it's so hard for so many of our students to show self-regulation when EF is so hard for them,
Yeah.
and vice versa.
Yeah, and so building EF skills will kind of inherently, because of this interconnectivity, will help students work towards regulation. So the one of the ways, or several of the ways that we can work towards building EF skills for students in school and at home is to focus on routine and structure, predictability. Um, and if you're moving out of that structure, your routine, give your kids a heads up about that. My kids are do way better when I tell them about today I'm picking you up for a doctor's appointment than if I surprise them with a break in the routine to go to the doctor. Breaking down tasks or helping students, maybe if you have older students or older kids, helping them break down tasks. Um, Starting tasks. What do you need to get started? Do you need a separate working environment? What materials do you need? Kind of sometimes we say priming the pump, asking a couple questions and spiraling back to the previous day or the previous lesson to get students back in the mode of your class or your project. Having students set goals. Maybe a goal is even just for the next 15 or 20 minutes, or maybe the goal is about completing a specific task. And then reiterating, spiraling back to challenges and successes. I was just talking to a student today who came to me. She desperately wanted to talk about her paper and said, I took this strategy on it, and now I'm thinking that like maybe that strategy wasn't the best strategy, and actually maybe I should do this other one because of XYZ reasons. I don't know. What do you think? And I was like, you don't need me. You just said it all. And so I really tried to kind of reiterate over and over, like, That was amazing self-awareness and metacognition that you just engaged in. You thought about all of that and just needed me to sign off and say, yes, go. So building that self-esteem by hammering the challenge, the successes, and helping our students and kids work through those challenges is going to help them build the executive function skills, which then will help support regulation skills.
Absolutely. So we're going to pivot a little bit to, if we remember one of our agenda items, is we're going to hit upon this kind of key thing that people are talking about a lot right now is this difference between dysregulation and discomfort. So we think it's important to distinguish the two because they often get used interchangeably when in fact they have different meanings. So if we're looking at this word dysregulation, specifically clinical dysregulation, we're referring to a condition where someone has difficulty regulating their emotions. Someone with clinical emotional dysregulation would have trouble controlling their emotions, which could lead to feelings of being overwhelmed or feeling stuck. And these intense responses really would be interfering with daily life, relationships, work, school. So it can look like a few different things, right? Someone could have difficulty calming down, even when that person knows, right? They logically understand that the situation is not, for lack of a better word, significant, right? So like the reaction side is not matching the size of the problem. It can also look like pretty low frustration tolerance, sudden, frequent outbursts, having difficulty focusing on anything aside from that big emotion or emotional situation. And dysregulation can be caused by a number of psychiatric conditions, including anxiety disorders, depression, ADHD, autism, bipolar disorder, post-traumatic stress, learning differences, right? So there's a lot of conditions that can kind of where clinical dysregulation can stem from, but this is more what we're talking about when you hear this word dysregulation. It's more of a clinically significant response.
So really, like a lot of the time when our students might even use that word dysregulation, or when we might be prompted to say a student's dysregulated, what we might really be thinking about is a student's experiencing discomfort. They're uncomfortable learning something new, not knowing an answer, making a mistake, especially making a mistake in a class where it's a little bit public, taking a risk on something, an academic risk, answering a question maybe, or maybe feeling awkward, which would certainly resonate probably with our middle and high school students. And so we want to talk a little bit about that sitting with discomfort, as you can see in the little picture here, and focus on that discomfort is natural. It's necessary to grow, to learn new things. Any learning that we've ever done, there's discomfort involved in that growth. I think about my little kids learning to walk. They fell down on their bums a lot, and maybe sometimes it wasn't always comfortable, but now they all three can walk. And so they had to go through that process to get to that learning. And so a lot of the time what we see with kids, both at home and at school, is avoiding what's uncomfortable, avoiding learning that new skill or avoiding trying something new, because that's helpful to the kids in the short term and maybe to us in the short term because it maybe keeps things calm for now. But that's just sort of kicking the can down the road. And when we give our kids the feedback that avoiding something is an okay strategy when something's uncomfortable, or we'll sort of remove a barrier or make something smoother or more comfortable for them because they're experiencing discomfort and unhappy about that. Just sort of showing them that you were right. You were right to be worried. You were right to avoid it. It's too big. It's too scary. And maybe then they're going to practice that strategy in the future. Not a long-term thing that we want for our kids. We want them to be able to practice sitting with those feelings and to some extent push through them, to understand that discomfort is temporary and it's going to fade. They'll get through it. They'll hopefully learn that skill. It might not be pretty, but those emotions with practice, like strengthening any muscle, will come with time and exposure. So when we're having students or kids experiencing discomfort, maybe that's showing up as not exactly calm. Maybe they're sort of elevated, appearing upset, teary, angry, maybe some yelling, annoyed. They're feeling and exhibiting the behaviors that are often described and associated with dysregulation, but they don't meet that criteria for clinical dysregulation. So basically, sort of, it will pass. We can use some strategies that this experience is not going to disrupt your daily life. And so that's what we're talking about with dysregulation versus discomfort.
So something to further kind of help conceptualize the difference between the two is the concept of easy, brave, and scary zones or spaces. So if we look at this, we're looking at easy first. Easy zone is where tasks are familiar and safe. Stress is low, you can do things easily, but you don't generally grow in this zone. There tends to not be very much reflection or learning that occurs in this space just because we're not really challenged. If we bump it up and move to the brave zone, that's where tasks are feeling a bit challenging or uncomfortable, right? This is where that sitting with discomfort comes. This is where the most learning and skill building happens. So it's expected to feel awkward or unfamiliar, uncomfortable in this zone. Um, Bump it up further, then we get to the scary zone, right? And scary zone is where challenge feels overwhelming or unsafe. Stress is so high that you can't think clearly or learn. You need to take a step back, right? And use some skills to help return to the brave zone. All of your energy is spent on managing or controlling fear or panic, which means there's little to no room for learning to happen there. So that brave zone is where we see that discomfort and where we expect and without sounding mean, want to see some discomfort because that's where learning happens. Teachers aren't going to put students in are going to put students in a brave space. They're not going to put students in a scary space on purpose. Um, and so that's something that we can talk about in the classroom and also at home, right? Of saying like your teachers and your parents, your caregivers aren't going to purposely put you in this scary space, but we will want you to be in a brave space and letting them know the difference between what the two look like. And also highlighting that everyone's going to have different limits, right? Everybody's easy and brave and scary zones look different from one another, and that's okay. We all have different limits, different experiences, but helping a student or a child kind of understand for themselves what that looks like, so they can understand that relationship to discomfort isn't always bad because discomfort can mean learning and growth.
Sometimes I'll say to students, like if they are telling me that they're in a scary space or people have put them in a scary space, I'll be like, okay, then you're going to need some adults to help you manage the situation. And for middle schoolers in particular, they're like, no, 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 no. I don't want adults to make it worse. And so they'll dial it back a little bit. Or sometimes they'll be really honest, like, I do need adults to step in. I
Mhm.
think it's helpful when that response is so big. It's like, okay, yeah, you need sometimes as grown-ups, we need other grown-ups to help us solve a problem if we're in a scary space. But brave, you can usually do on your own or with some support.
And I think there's so much value in the transparency with students around that of that language, right? Of what an easy, brave, and scary space looks like for that reason.
I think that's like really tying back to that topic of like self-awareness too, right? Like, if we can show them those sort of, we're not just sort of throwing things at you haphazardly, like we're doing this on purpose, this is an intentional challenge. And if you're in that brave space, like you might feel not so, you might feel kind of icky about it, and that's okay. And so it's just kind of tying back into talking about it openly, and helping students, I think, identify maybe those feelings as are coming up for them, um, which can really tie into the actual regulation that we're looking for. So when we're talking about regulation, what are the steps to getting there? We got to first like learn about the feelings. We talked at the beginning of the presentation about emotional vocabulary and tying into self-awareness and actually just having the language to put words to feelings and behaviors. So we've got to learn about the feelings, talk about them openly, talk about how it feels in your body.
Nope, I think Hillary might have frozen. I think she was going to say, kind of following the sequence, right? I mean, you guys already described the pause and then that ability to manage the feelings and all the different strategies from the yes and to describing the brave, scary, safe zones and kind of those different pieces. And the biggest piece, I think, for that sitting in discomfort is that you have to do it anyway.
Good
And I think,
thing.
like, what a good lesson for all the things as adults we do anyway.
Mhm. Absolutely. So something to think about that, right, is that in order for a student child to regulate, it really starts with the adults in their lives too. So it starts regulating at home, right? Let's think about that, for example, starts with you. So we are models to our students, whether we want to be or not. And we learn from watching others, right? Regulate or not regulate. So our students, our kids are watching those around them, and that's kind of that first step is that modeling. Um, but self-care is a great way to support our own regulation as well as to model that, because we really can't effectively model proper and appropriate self-regulation without being in a space to do so ourselves.
Think about that like pause breath and just the value of that, or watching someone else struggle is so hard, but just like that self-talk of like, this is not mine to like get involved with, or I'm just going to hold space, or they're uncomfortable, they're not dysregulated, like they're safe, even though
Yeah.
having to talk yourself through that is like one way to stay regulated when your kids aren't, for sure.
Yeah. And some things that you can do, your kids can do as well. So like you can model that, right? That pause breath, being able to do that with your students or your kids. Another strategy that I like is taking a sip of water, right? Like a cold bonus if it's cold, right? Because like gives you pause and also that temperature change can kind of help to regulate you. It can be grounding. But also taking space, taking a moment when that's an option, I think is really great to model, right? It shows our students, our kids that we don't have to have an answer right away or solve or fix a problem right away, so we can model for the kids in our lives that we can advocate for space when we need, and that can look like at home, right, saying like, hey, I'm too frustrated to talk about this right now, like let's come back to it in 10 minutes. Again, that modeling piece is huge.
And the reality of like, we're not going to be regulated all the time. So why as
Mhm.
adults should we pretend that's true? Because that's not the goal,
Yeah,
right? The goal is to be better regulated. But I think we have students who are smart enough to know like, you can't be regulated all the time. That's
all the time.
impossible.
And that helps, I think, our kids with self-awareness as if we were able to own it ourselves.
So I know just in terms of time, and I know Hillary was going to talk a little bit more about teaching regulation, but I think you all touched on it already, the importance of kind of validating the feelings that our kids may have and being present and supporting them in the moment. But that doesn't mean kind of like changing the pathway or letting go of the expectations, especially that forecasting you guys talked about, which I love. I think it's so helpful to kind of predict what people
Mhm.
might feel because that brings in the self-awareness, but also the regulation. I can regulate so much more when I know other people understand what I'm feeling because I don't feel like it's wildly inappropriate or strange that I'm feeling that way.
Takes out
Um,
the judgment piece. Mhm.
exactly, that self-judgment piece. So I think we're gonna head towards questions now, just knowing what time it is.
Mhm.
Take a moment, see if there are any questions. Thank you for hanging with us and being regulated enough to stick out an hour-long presentation tonight. You can have questions specifically for Delaney or Hillary or about the topic in general. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Again, we will send out the recording tomorrow, so you're able to access that. And again, feel free to sign up for our upcoming webinar, which will be in March. We thank you for being here tonight, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Amazing. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Laura.